Chapter 10. Lunch at Rat's House. The last session with Heron left Toad feeling rather desolate. He understood the concept of the critical parent when it applied to other people, Badger especially. But when he applied it to himself, the thought that he was criticizing and even punishing himself was unnerving. Yet, at the same time, he was aware that there were changes happening to him. Deep within himself, he was feeling stronger. He found that he was able to consider those very emotional and threatening ideas more rationally. He was less emotional when he viewed himself objectively, and this enabled him to understand himself better and to learn. Yet, intellectually, he felt there was still a piece of the puzzle missing. He understood just how much of the time he was in his adapted child state, and it was beginning to dawn on him that he had the ability, or even the need, to criticize and punish himself in the same way his parents had done when he was little. He remembered something that Heron had said about collusion, a secret or unknowing cooperation with others. Could you collude with yourself to condemn yourself, and without even knowing you were doing it, even unconsciously? These were difficult ideas for Toad to handle, especially when they involved his very self. They flitted through his mind like shadows, and seemed equally impossible to capture and examine. What was the way forward? Heron kept on about understanding and learning, but where was it all leading? For the first time since he started to work with the Heron, he wondered how much longer the counselling would last. But at the same time, Toad was beginning to feel more energetic. One morning he found himself walking down the garden path that led to the dry boathouse, where a number of racing skiffs were kept. He examined them and found one that appeared to be in good condition. He carried it to the water's edge, fetched the oars, carefully climbed in, and started gently to paddle the boat upstream. He didn't do it all badly. He had always rolled and splashed a good deal, but this time he consciously restrained himself, and after a while returned. When he got out, he was panting and his back was aching, but he felt good. "I really enjoyed that," he said to himself. "That deserves a beer." So he went and had one. Later that week he received an invitation to lunch with Rat and Mole. Since the beginning of his depression, they had left him on his own. This was for a number of reasons. The first was, they were a little embarrassed by Toad's initial behaviour, and were uncertain how to cope with it. And second, like all sick or wounded animals, Toad had simply wanted to crawl away and be left on his own, and he had clearly signalled this. But now things were different. For a start, the weather was improving. The sun was getting warmer every day, and, up and down the river bank, boats were being painted and varnished ready for summer. Word had got around that Toad was on the water again, and not looking too bad. But more than all of that, Rat and Mole had missed him, so they invited him to lunch. As Toad walked along the river bank to Rat's house, he felt very fragile. It was as if the suit of armour he usually wore was removed. His senses, especially his sight, seemed to be particularly acute. The colours of the grass and the trees were unusually vibrant, and he thought that never before had he realised there were so many shades of green. He felt in touch with things and alert to his surroundings. As he walked, he found that he was checking over his feelings in much the same way as a pilot checks his instruments before take-off. Although he was slightly apprehensive about meeting his friends again, on the whole he was feeling good. "If Heron asked me where I was now on my feelings thermometer," he thought, "I would say 8. When he arrived, his friends gave him an extremely warm welcome. He was given the best chair by the fire. It was still chilly indoors, and Mole shoved cushions all around him to ensure he was comfortable. "Oh, Toad, it's so good to see you," said Mole. "We've been so worried about you." "Yes, we have," said Rat gruffly. He couldn't show his feelings quite as easily as his friends. "We certainly have missed you. Sherry?" Toad was offered a small glass of dry sherry, and tried to sip it slowly. He could never understand how anyone could make these tiny glasses last so long. He was essentially a brandy and soda man, and when he drank sherry at home, he tended to use a wine glass. "How are you chaps?" he asked. "You're both looking well. Anything much happening on the river bank? Have I missed much?" "No, not too much," answered Mole. "You know how it is in the winter. Things can go very quiet, and this year it was too cold to go out much." Mole paused. "But do you notice anything, Toady? I've spent a lot of time decorating this room. Do you like the wallpaper? It's William Morris design called Willow Boughs." Toad looked around and realised that the room was in fact looking very different from when he had last seen it. The walls were papered with a swirling pattern of thin brown willow branches, laden with green and yellow leaves. Mole had whitewashed the ceiling, and the whole room, with its old oak furniture and glowing fireplace, had an air of solid comfort and sensible values. "Excellent," said Toad. "How well you've done it, Mole. I only wish Toad Hall looked half as smart." And he started to feel a bit dejected. "Now then," interrupted Rat, "how about some lunch?" "Nothing fancy here, you know. We live quite plainly." Mole was about to add, "Not like you at Toad Hall," but he saw how Toad was feeling and kept quiet. The lunch was plain but good. Rat had made a thick onion soup with croutons. Then there was Stilton and plenty of fresh crusty bread and butter and pickles. They finished their meal with a plate of the best kind of apples, Cox's orange pippins, and all of this was served with a frothy jug of beer. Soon tongues were loosened and Toad began to feel at ease, almost like his old self. He found himself laughing at one of Rat's anecdotes and responding with one of his own. Then Mole asked if he had seen Badger lately. "We haven't seen him for ages." "Well, strangely enough, he called on me only the other day," replied Toad. "Called on you?" exclaimed Rat. "Good heavens, he must think the world of you, Toad. I've never known Badger to call on anyone before." "Well, it wasn't quite like that," said Toad, and he started to tell him about Badger's visit, and how he had wanted him to resign his school governorship so that he could take it over. "Well, I'm blowed," said Mole, when Toad had finished his story. "What a nerve! Badger's got so many good points, and he's very energetic, but he can be very arrogant. What a nerve!" "Yes," agreed Rat, "but you haven't told us what you finally decided to do." "Haven't I?" asked Toad. "Well, I thought about it for a long time. I even discussed it with Heron." "Is that your counsellor?" interrupted Mole. "How's that going?" "Oh, not too bad," said Toad. Then he continued, "I had finally decided to resign. I just felt I couldn't go against Badger any longer. He's so strong and so sure of himself. But then I thought, why should I? Why should I have to agree with him? Why shouldn't I do what I want to do? To be honest, I felt quite angry with him." "So did you go and see Badger and tell him?" asked Mole with great interest. "No, I decided not to," said Toad. "I felt that if I saw him I would be bound to lose. Rather childish, really, I admit, but true. So I wrote him a note instead, saying that on further consideration I would not resign because I was feeling a lot better. If he felt like it, he could put his name forward in September when I come up for re-election, and we will see what happens then." "Well done," said Rat warmly. "I think, given the circumstances, you handled that extremely well." "Yes, you certainly did," agreed Mole. "I'd say that you won." "Do you really think so?" asked Toad, feeling strangely pleased. "I felt worn out by the end of it. I felt I'd been fighting a battle which was not of my choosing. Anyway, it's over and done with now. I hope," he added sotto voce. After some more chat, Toad said he must be getting back. Rat and Mole said they would go with him as they needed the exercise. So the three companions walked back to Toad Hall. There Toad thanked them for lunch, and they agreed to meet up again soon. "Perhaps a rubber of bridge," suggested Rat, who played a sound hand and had taught Mole the basics of the game. "We would need a fourth," said Mole. "Not Badger," said Toad strongly. "No, I was thinking of Otter," answered Rat. "Anyway, we'll leave it for now and get in touch. Bye!" And off they went. As they were walking home, Mole said to Rat, "Well, what do you think?" "About what?" asked Rat, whose mind was on other things. "About Toad, of course. Don't you think he's changed?" "Yes, I do," said the Rat, "but it's hard to put your finger on it." "He listened more," answered Mole. "That's what it was. He listened, and, what's more, he seemed genuinely interested in what we had to say. Usually you can hardly finish a sentence before he comes crashing in. If I'm honest, he seemed nicer and quieter, not so tiring." "Yes, I know what you mean," agreed Rat. "He used to be a bit of an ass, always boasting and full of himself, but I suppose his breakdown," this had become the accepted way to describe Toad's situation, "has knocked the stuffing out of him. But I was surprised to hear his story about Badger. Toad would never have stood up to him in the past. What a difference!" "Yes, I agree," said Mole. "But," he added wistfully, "I think Toad has lost his sparkle."